Welcome to this week's edition of Dugout Dish Podcast. I'm Andy Kirikides, joined with my lovely co-host Keith Glasser. Keith, how we doing?
Great. How are you?
Excited for today. We got long-standing friend of the podcast, Philadelphia legend, Pennsylvania legend, through and through, Jonathan Grasset with us today. We're going to talk postseason baseball. We're going to give a rundown of the Division I rigmarole from this past weekend, talk a little bit about D2, D3, and see if we can do a little bit better than we did last year with some of our picks. You guys ready to roll?
Yeah, fired up. I mean, I know we did last year. We did Super Regional, bumped it up a week this year. We'll do Regional. We'll got Super Regional next week you'll get with us, and then we'll crush the final eight, 8 for Omaha. But thanks again for having me, guys, on, and I always enjoyed breaking down some good college baseball with you guys.
Let's do it to it. Well, let's kick this thing off with some thoughts, some takeaways, maybe air some grievances here to open this up around the Division I selection process from yesterday. Jonathan, what do you got? What's on your mind?
Yeah, I think that a couple things. I think the committee. And then obviously it's been the hot topic, right? The committee with the picks, the final 6 in, you have 4 members, on the committee that, were the last 4 in of the 6. None of the first 4 out had any committees on or any ADs on the committee, which I think is a big deal. I think that was my big one. I think, and I broke it down a lot, and I know we've talked a lot. The big one for me is Charleston. I think Charleston got totally screwed. Like that was my one. Troy, I thought, got handed a bad card. TCU a little bit, but TCU's Big 12 aggregate wasn't great. But I think Charleston for me, man, was a big one that they did everything that they were supposed to. They won 41 games, or 28-3, or 28-5 in the last 33, something like that. They just did a lot. They went to the CAA championship. Northeastern should have been in, but there's kind of been precedent that a mid-major going 2-2 in their conference tournament does not get in. So I understand that. But like Charleston went to the final. They lost to Wilmington. Wilmington was a 2 seed, which I also think kind of gets lost in this. Wilmington was a 2 seed. They beat Wilmington in the conference, on the conference weekend. Just felt like Charleston, kind of got left out. The other big one for me is I think we need to. I think there needs to be 2 things that need to happen. I think we need to have the committee needs to tell us where they're at some point during the season, whether it's 2 weeks left, whether it's halfway through, but the committee needs to tell us what are they thinking, who's in, who's out, give us some type of insight, because just going into this Monday with no information on what they're valuing. Are we valuing the RPI this year? Are we not valuing the RPI this year? Are we valuing quad 1 wins this year? This year, the chairman gets on and said, well, we valued head-to-head. Well, you didn't value head-to-head because Charleston had the best head-to-head against everybody in the tournament out of all the last 9 teams in. Or I'm sorry, the last 4 or 5 teams in, and then the first 4 out. So you said that, but you didn't value that. So what are we looking at year to year that's going to determine who's getting in and who's not getting in? I didn't personally think the last thing, and I'll end with this, the last thing I didn't think is I understand how you put Florida in. I get it. Because you put Bama in. Bama and Florida had an aggregate of 13 and 18. I get it. Florida was 28-27, man. Like that's not a tournament team. It's not. It's not. They shouldn't have been in. I get what the thought process was. Again, AD on the committee, so we'll just get back to that. But I just don't see. I just didn't see them. I didn't see Florida in. And again, I know when you compare the resumes, I just felt like you go 13 and 18. There was 3 others that made a run. Vandy made a run. Some others made a run in the SEC tournament, got that aggregate SEC record to be better. Good, you're in, no issues, no questions asked. 13 and 18, in my opinion, should not be a should not be a tournament team.
Keith, what do you got on that?
Yeah, I mean, the three of us sit and talk college baseball almost every day. And for 8-9 weeks now, 10 weeks, our group chat is called "What's with the emoji of a gator ranked," because we've been complaining, earlier in the year where they were, and I agree. Like, it's, when Andy and I were talking about this morning, they need to rank 1 through 64 like they do in basketball and everything else. But like, from a talent standpoint, I get it, right? We all get it. Like, are they probably one of the most talented teams in the country of the top 164? Absolutely they are. But we as coaches know this, like, they did not earn their way into the tournament this year. Like, you're an above 500 team. You're one game above 500. You finished 11th in the SEC. Like, you're not a tournament team this year. And that's okay. But, the fact that they got put in, especially over a team like Charleston, I thought Charleston, in recent memory is probably one of the biggest left out teams that I can remember in recent years. And I mean, Coach Holberg had some pretty suggestive words to throw out there, which I get, like, that guy got fired out of the SEC for some of that stuff. So, for mediocre seasons, I should say. But, I thought that, the biggest thing for me is I think, and you saw a lot of the people that are in this business from a, talking head standpoint, I thought kind of hit the nail on the head. Like, there needs to be more transparency in this process. Like, the 4 bubble teams that were legit on the bubble all had people on the committee and they all got in. Even though, like, you can tell me all you want, like, oh, they recused themselves from the discussion. Like, come on, man. Like, all 4 of them got into the tournament. Like, we all know what this is. And I think the other part is, like, in order for this game to continue to grow, like, we need to do a better job with stuff like this in the tournament, but also leading up to it of, like, where are teams ranked? What is the 1 through 64? Like, what does that look like? Because, you have teams like Northeastern that I thought personally probably should have got in over UConn. Andy and I have talked about this. I know he's done a little bit more research on that specific topic. But there was some of those mid-major teams that, historically over the last, 5, 6, 7, 8 years have been pretty good. That seems like they've just kind of earned the right to get in that large bid when, maybe this year wasn't really the year that they should have gotten one. And, that bubble team that, hasn't necessarily earned that right yet didn't get it. And I do think, the CAA being a 1-bid league, I thought was, with Northeastern being let out, but, UNCW also had a legit argument to be, Charleston and Northeastern both had arguments to be in there. I mean, you had the regular season champion, they lose in the championship game. Like, that's 40 plus wins. Come on. What are we doing here? But, and then I think my only other takeaway, and I texted you guys the other night, like, Arizona being a host, I thought was kind of surprising. But I get it. Like, can you really leave a Power 5 Pac-12 regular season and tournament champion not as a host? They're not going to be a 2 seed, really, right? Like, that, I get that part of it, but I found that to be kind of surprising with kind of what that conference was this year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on 100% on board with the Florida thing. I think there's 3 examples that stuck out to me of teams that I didn't think should have got in, and teams that should have got in that were pretty clear cut to me. Especially, you're talking not only a regional component, you got head-to-head matchups that you can go off of, and to go back to Charleston, Carolina getting in over Charleston's crazy to me. You got a regular season conference champion in Charleston, 41 wins. Very similar in the RPI range. And Coastal Carolina ends up getting in probably in Charleston's spot if you wanted to play it like that. I thought that was pretty clear cut that Charleston's resume was just better, period. I mean, Coastal Carolina finished 7th in their conference. The other one, going back to the Sun Belt, is Troy and Indiana, which is another one that didn't make sense to me. You got Indiana finishing 3rd place in a below average Big Ten. I think there was a good argument to be made that nobody in the Big Ten should have got in except for Nebraska. I know Illinois run the regular season, but Nebraska was clearly the best team in that conference when you look at their total resume. But Troy and Indiana are almost identical when you break down the metrics. I think Troy's 54 in the RPI, which is still high. I think prior to this year, the lowest RPI that had gotten in was a 47. This year, 2 teams over 50 got in. So Troy's got more wins. Their RPI separates them by 2 spots in the RPI rankings. But here's the kicker. Troy went to Bloomington and won 2 out of 3. So to your point, Jonathan, are we really taking into consideration head to head? You know, and I heard Skylar Meade talk a little bit, and he's spot on. Like, their resume is strong. Like, I don't think that there was several other teams that got into the tournament that I don't think had their resume. And then there's Northeastern and UConn, which, Northeastern went 0-2 in the conference tournament. It's probably ultimately what did them in. But that's a 38-win team that traveled to Arizona, won on the road against a top 13 seed in the country. They challenged themselves in other places. They went down, they played Old Dominion. Really good Sun Belt team. They got more wins than UConn. Their RPI is higher than UConn. And they smashed UConn twice in the regular season. So, for me, those are the 3 that I got caught up on in terms of teams getting left out, where I thought some stuff was a little bit funky. There were some other teams that I thought were fringy. I think if you look past the wins and losses, I think Oregon was a tough one for me to go in. Yeah, I think K-State was the other one that, that I thought there was other teams that were a little bit more deserving. But, I mean, you get this every year, but the Charleston one and the committee members getting their colleges in are probably the 2 things that really stick out to me with the selection process, that they need to add a layer of transparency here, or whether it was intentional or not, the optics of it are really, really bad.
I think that was like kind of like my biggest thing too, is like 4 of the last 6 in had committee members or ADs on the committee, and all 4 on the first 4 out did not have, and that was their information. It's not my information. It's their information that they're saying, here are the last 4 in, or they said the last 6 in. Here are the first 4 out. The first 4 out had no ADs on the committee. The last 6 had 4 of 6. We just have to be better than that. Like, and I don't know, I don't know, like, was it Coastal that didn't deserve to get in, or Kansas State or Indiana, but all 3 of their ADs are on the committee. We have to be better than that. We can't just continue to do this going in blind like that. And I think, kind of like what we were talking about before, like Keith made a really good point. Like, we need to be ranked 1 through 64. I personally think that, and I know Kyle Peterson did a really good job last night on Twitter about, getting us to 72. We probably need to get to 72, which I think would be a great thing for the game, and not that you're going to have teams shorted at 72. Just like if you were to have 150 teams in it, you're going to have some teams shorted. But I think we need to grow the game to 72. Basketball does a great job with it. Football's obviously going to that this fall. Let's go to 72. Let's rank us all 1 through 72. Now we don't have any, funny business with, sending certain teams to certain regionals because we're trying to save money. If we really want to advance the game, and if that's the committee's real job here is to advance the game, we need to get away from some of the stuff that we've done for a really, really, really long time, because it saves money and it's easier for the NCAA to send Indiana State to Kentucky or to Tennessee when they were probably team 17 or 18 when it was really broken down in terms of who should have hosted and who shouldn't have. But now they have to go to a national seed in Kentucky because it's convenient, because it's only a few hours away.
I mean, I think you can make a good argument that if you want to grow the game, like, why not bring some of those West Coast teams east and some of those East Coast teams west? I mean, are we really pinching that many pennies? Like, that would be my question to the NCAA. Like, are we really pinching that many pennies, guys? Like, this college baseball is a moneymaker now. Not at every level. But, I mean, the College World Series it's an extravaganza these days.
I mean, even look at the SEC. I mean, you look at the SEC. The SEC and the ACC both broke records for attendance this weekend.
Yep.
So no more of this. Oh well, let's And again, there was precedent, obviously, with Arizona being a Pac-12 team, and they won the regular season, they won the tournament, they host. Okay, fine, but it just seemed like some of those regionals out west were just super convenient to just throw them into the 16 because geographically the way that the way it works is we're going to need a couple of West Coast sites. Well, if they're not the best 16, then why are they in it? Like, why are they a national seed in hosting? What are we like? Again, rank them 1 through 64 as it is right now, and if we go to 72, which I think would be great for the game, go 1 through 72. And we'll call it a day, and you seed that way.
It makes too much sense. It makes too much sense. Any other takeaways, any other shout outs you'd like to give before we move on to a couple cool stories with Division II and Division III? All right. IU, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, IUPU. Is that correct?
IUP.
IUP. Jonathan, this one's close to you. Former Pennsylvania Division II legend.
Yeah, we did a pre-show. I said to these guys, when I was at Kutztown, we played them in the semifinal in the PSACs in 2010. They were really good. They were really, really, really good. Fell on some hard times. Things kind of came undone. 2021, I think they were like 3-31, 2 or 3-31, something like crazy. And they're going to the College World Series, which I think is really cool. Again, I'm a state school Pennsylvania guy, so I'm a little bit biased, but just shout out to them. Steve Klein, I think he's from out there, or I think he might even be from Indiana, actually, Indiana, Pennsylvania. 3 years later, they're in a College World Series. They won 2 or 3 games, like I said, 2 or 3 years ago. So I think that was a really, really, really cool story. A lot of the similar suspects in terms of Division II in that Final 8. But I just thought that was one story for me, which just like jumped out. It was like really cool, like to be able to turn them around that fast. At a place that they had been good, but they'd never been to a College World Series before. It's their first College World Series appearance ever. And traditionally the western side of the PSAC is a little bit lighter. Especially in terms of representation at the World Series. The East is Millersville, Kutztown, Westchester has been very, very, very well represented. So for them to do that and then to run the table and beat Seton Hill, which I'm sure is a big rival for them, in the Supers was really, really, really cool. So shout out to IUP. Good luck, guys. Go get them. Really cool.
Yeah, that's a wild story. Like, that kind of a turnaround is just not normal. It usually just doesn't happen that quick. And I mean, Division II baseball is so good. And if you're listening to this and you don't tune into it, or you don't plan on tuning into it, like, take some time to go watch some of that, because I think you'll be very, very impressed with the level of talent that's going to be rolled out there. I mean, a couple blue bloods. You got Tampa, seems to pop up in the World Series every year. Southern New Hampshire continued, despite their head coach leaving to take the pitching coach job at Penn State. We're able to keep that ship rolling. Another really high quality year from them. University of Indianapolis continues to show up there, and Angelo State, I believe, is the defending national champion, who's back trying to double up here. So pretty stacked field, and yeah, definitely tune into that. I think, Keith, you this is near and dear to you as well when you were at Southern Arc, is
West Alabama.
West Alabama, excuse me.
Yeah, get it right or pay the price.
Sorry, apologies. But like you witnessed how talented the field is when you get into the postseason at Division II. And I think it flies under the radar for a lot of people who follow college baseball, and they forget some of these teams they're beyond talented, and they can go toe to toe with a lot of schools regardless of level.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it last week with Cookie, because we didn't coach against each other. We didn't play Florida Southern, but we were in the same regional back in 2009. I mean, Tommy Canley pitched in that regional. There was an 8th overall pick, first rounder, Hayden Simpson out of Southern Arkansas that year. I mean, there were just dudes all over that field. There were 4 guys on. I'd coached 4 guys from Florida Southern in the summer. 3 of them got drafted. Most of them made up to double or triple A. I mean, there's a kid, Daniel Tillman, who in 09 was, summer of 08, he was a freshman at Florida Southern playing for us in the Clark Griffith League, now defunct. I mean, he was all of 93 to 96, in 2009 when, that was a Division II guy in 2009 doing that stuff like that. That wasn't necessarily the most common thing going on back then. They had a catcher who got drafted, a shortstop who made it up AAA. But those were all guys in the regional. That doesn't count Delta State. Tampa was in that regional. I mean, there's dudes all over Division II baseball. And I think that it's, my eyes were open. I've said this before. I went down there being a Division I guy from upstate New York, like, oh my goodness, how good is this going to be? And all of a sudden you're like, wow, there's dudes all over the field here. Like this is big boy baseball. But yeah, I mean, the Division II World Series starts on Saturday, I believe, June 1st. So, there's going to be a bunch of games going on, try to tune in and catch some of those games because it's really good baseball. And Point Loma out of California is good. Central Missouri is the 1 seed. I mean, there's going to be a lot of really good baseball being played on starting on Saturday in the Division II World Series.
No doubt about it. Let's move on to the Division III field. I know we have a former podcast guest will be coaching in the College World Series, but I think the lead story here is Birmingham Southern.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a team that is playing in the College World Series at a school that no longer exists as an institution, which is unfortunate. I mean, we've seen this all over colleges and college athletics, but, to see a team that is playing for a school that legit no longer exists starting on Friday, and they play on Friday. The end of May is when Birmingham Southern will cease operation. And Birmingham Southern will be playing Friday at 4:45 p.m. In the College World Series for the Division III, in the Division III championship. So, it's a wild story. They were an at-large bid into the tournament, and then they ran the table in the regional, obviously, and they went into Denison, I believe, who was number 2 in the country behind Endicott. And Denison, had a phenomenal year, under Coach Deegan and Ryan out there. So, they were probably the underdog in that series. They went in there and swept them. And if I recall, I saw on Twitter, most of the team had food poisoning and they were catching IVs in between games. And then went out and won game 2 to get into the World Series. So the story is incredible. Like they had a bunch of guys that, the school doesn't exist anymore. They have a bunch of guys with food poisoning and they go into Denison and win and get to the World Series. So shout out to those Birmingham Southern kids. You're going to have a lot of fans from afar here because I'd love to see those guys run the table and do something that we will likely never see again. In a program winning a championship at the NCAA level at a school that no longer exists. So I think that would be really cool. And I think the 2 other things just real quick, Endicott and Salve are the 1 and 2 seed New England teams. ODAC has 2 teams in again, defending champion Lynchburg and Randolph-Macon, who we had Coach Hedrick on earlier in the year. Phenomenal human being and friend of the show, but shout out to him for getting the Randolph-Macon fighting bees, Yellow Jackets, Hornets, whatever they are, into the World Series. That Birmingham Southern story is crazy.
If they win the whole thing, What's going to be on the trophy?
I don't know.
Right?
If you're the coach, you just keep it, right? Like,
You're right. You're dead right. Like, it's an amazing story, and like they've been really, really, really good for a really long time. They were good at the Division I level, then they go down to Division III. Good friend of ours, Coach Webb who's at Andy for a while, who's now a pro agent. Yep. He's an alum there. Like, it's just like I just if they win the whole thing, what does it say on the trophy? Like all the names of all the players? Like
it has to.
Anything. It's wild.
I think you get if they win the whole thing, every player gets to keep the trophy for a week, like they do in the NHL when you get Lord Stanley's Cup for like a week or whatever.
Like people can drink the cup or whatever. Yeah.
Either that, or you melt it down and you make all the rings out of the trophy. That'd be a pretty gangster move.
That would be pretty sick.
So cool, really cool.
Yeah, pretty wild. That's a stacked field. Like Pomona, West Coast Power. Like we were talking about Frank Pericolosi, who's been there since 2003. And they win a lot. They got high academic standards. Like, it's a heck of a run for them. Pete Egbert at Misericordia, we were talking about, they're just in the mix every year.
Mm-hmm.
And they play hard. They play super high quality baseball. They're incredibly well coached, coming out of Dallas, PA. And you got, Endicott and Salve, like, it's just another cool story. Like Northeast teams that they go and find these kids and they develop them. And I know Endicott's got some bros at the front end. Salve, Newport, get the highfalutin living there, moving into the Division III World Series. Like it's a cool field.
God, I love
well represented. But yeah, that Birmingham Southern story is a tough one to top.
And Whitewater is a blue blood, really. Like, Whitewater's been one of the better teams in Division III for the last 10, 15 years. They won a national championship, probably about a decade ago, maybe a little bit, 11 years, but still, like, they're always in it. Macon's been really good, obviously, for a while, but we glossed over the fact that Lynchburg's back in it after a little bit of a slow start after being defending national champions. But I think that's the one thing I was watching the regionals and the supers, like, they've been here before, and it was like it showed when it got into the playoffs. So I think Lynchburg's like Lynchburg Endicott at 1:15 on Friday. That's a pretty good. That's a good game to tune into and watch those two. Number one team in the country for a really long time this year, and the defending national championship teeing off in round one. I think that's going to be an awesome game.
Tune in. Check it out. All right. Moving on. So we've got 64 teams. We've got 16 brackets. Let's run them down. You guys ready to do this?
I just want you guys to know I have a Google Doc that I created while we were talking that has all the regionals, and then it has us and all our picks. So I'll share this with you after after the show is over. And then we're going to keep this running through Supers in Omaha to keep track. We've gotten better, everybody, in the last year. Instead of me writing it down in live time, trying to figure out where we're at, we're just going to do it on the internet, on the interwebs, and share it with each other, and then we can all see it.
Love it. All right. Well, I guess
my 8-0 Super Regional picks are on there from last year. If you could if you guys need a refresher on that, Keith, just make sure you put that record on there as well.
I will.
All right. Well, let's get this thing started. We'll start right at the top with the number one seed Tennessee Volunteers in Knoxville. We got Tennessee as the 1, Southern Miss is the 2, Indiana, who I blasted earlier, as the 3. And then we got Northern Kentucky moving in as the 4 seed here. Jonathan, what we got?
Yeah, I think Christian Moore is Christian Moore. If you look at his stats, like from the SEC, like there was a really good image they had on the SEC in the SEC tournament of comparing 3 players' resumes, and you looked at his and you were like, and nothing against the other 2 guys in Condon and and Cags, but like you look at these stats for Christian Moore, I mean, he's not even in the area code of anybody else. They're really good on the mound. They're old. I said it all along, like, and I know some people have issues with the way they play and, kind of how, some of their guys act, but like those dudes would literally fight another individual for Tony V. I don't think they had any issues. I know being the number one overall seeds, it's kind of a jinx, but it's almost like you don't even want to do it. But I don't think they have any issues. I think they walk right through, and they'll host a super in 8 or 9 days.
Keith, what do you got?
I'm going to take Tennessee. I think Tennessee is obviously, they've proven it at this point in the year that they're, arguably one of the best 4 teams in the country. And we had this conversation in midway through the year that we thought that they were right, 1A and B behind A&M and Arkansas, I think at the time, but they've played phenomenal baseball down the stretch. I do think, and I'm just going to say this, I think that Southern Miss could give them a little bit of a fight, but ultimately I do think that, Tennessee is going to move on. I don't think Northern Kentucky or Indiana are going to make much noise, but Southern Miss, they made a run last year and they had 40 wins this year. I wouldn't be surprised if they make a little bit of noise, but at the end of the day, I think Tennessee is hosting a super in another week and a half.
Yeah, Southern Miss is always tough. It's a pretty seasoned group, well coached. They've been in the tournament before, playing a really tough conference, but they can't pitch off. They got to throw their guy game 1 against Indiana to get through there. And I think that's a big advantage and I don't think this is the case for all of the regionals, but one of the advantages for a lot of the 1 seeds is that you don't have to throw your number 1 guy. And it really sets you up for success. And it sets you up to go deep in case you do stumble in game 2, that you've kind of got things set up. So I have a hard time thinking that any of those teams knock off Tennessee. It's not like they stumbled. Like they just keep winning. They didn't lose their first game in the SEC tournament. Like they just keep winning. I have a hard time thinking that anybody really gives them too much trouble. Like maybe Southern Miss keeps it tight, but I think I'm going to go ahead and make the consensus.
And here's, I think, there's a wildest stat for them. They were 50-11.
Mm-hmm.
50-11.
In the best conference in college baseball, 50-11.
And again, you don't want to be the 1 seed, yada, 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 but 50-11. And this is 2 years ago. People forget this, but they were garbage. When Tony got there, they were garbage. They're going to be the number 1 overall seed 2 of the last 3 years.
Yep. The only team with more quad 1 wins, and it's by 1, is Kentucky. They're 21-9 against quad 1 teams. Kentucky's 22-9.
Yeah, just an incredible regular season for those guys, and barring a major hiccup, which I guess can always happen, but I don't see anybody on there that really presses them. I think they run it and get ready to go play the next bracket we're going to talk about, which is Greenville, ECU. This one's a little bit interesting. I think there's a couple storylines here that are pretty cool, and then obviously the potential big storyline if one particular team ends up making it out of here. But we got ECU, Wake Forest, VCU, and Evansville. Evansville got in, winning their conference tournament. VCU, pretty much the class of the A-10 most of the year. St. Louis had a really nice regular season, but ECU put together another awesome year. Bradley Leacroy has done a really good job picking up where Sean Stifler left off after he left to go to Notre Dame. I think they were a 38-win team. Pretty much handled their way through the A-10 tournament. They got a big-time bat in the Ike kid, who was the A-10 player of the year. Probably going to end up getting drafted pretty high in the near future. You got Wake Forest and then ECU. So Keith, start this one off. What do you got for us?
I'm going to stick to my guns. I'm going to take the Demon Deacons in this regional. Honestly, I think we're all in agreement on this. Is I think the winner of this region is going to be the winner of game 2, because I'm going to imagine that Wake is likely throwing off. So is ECU, and we're going to get an epic matchup of top 10 picks. We'll just ballpark it at a top 10 with Burns and Trey. I mean, hopefully, I know he said he's throwing this weekend. Billy Godwin came out last week and said that he had a collapsed lung, which is obviously scary, and we hope that he's coming back okay from that. But I mean, those two pitching in, on day 2 at night, or in the afternoon, I should say, would be an electric matchup. I think that Wake's offense is probably a little bit much for everyone else in this region. East Carolina did stumble a little bit against Wichita State. I mean, they had to win twice to get into the championship game. And they won game. I actually watched it. They won the first game on a walk-off steal of home, and they scored like 4 in the 9th. And this Wichita State's good. Like, take nothing away from them. And Wichita State ended up beating them and getting into the championship game. But you can't necessarily fight from behind like that in this type of playoff baseball. And I think if Wake can get up on a lot of these guys offensively, and they can put it away, because they're still pretty good. They were preseason number 1. I know they stumbled a little bit, but I do think Wake is the likely winner here in Greenville. Andy?
All right. This one's interesting to me because I think ECU is probably a more complete team than people realize. Like, they're sub 4 as a team. They're hitting 310. They got a little bit of thump. They got a couple dudes who thump it a little bit, 14, 12, and 14 home runs in a lineup. Slightly different level of competition than what Wake faces week in and week out. I think the big storyline for me here is, if you're Wake and you're going to win this thing, you got to pitch off, in my opinion. We'll see what Walt ends up doing to get that, assume that you go and win against VCU. You throw Burns against ECU, which is, what you talked about, Keith. But I'm going to call it how I see it. Josh Hartle is far from a sure thing. This is not the dude that threw for Wake Forest last year. I mean, it's like if you break it down from a stock perspective and you remove his first 2 years of college, like, he's a super average starter in the upper level of college baseball. It's 87 and 90. I don't think VCU is going to be intimidated by him. I wouldn't be surprised if they give him a little bit of trouble, but they need Hartle to throw well, because that Wake bullpen is not deep, and they've had trouble with it all year long. Roldan really struggled in the ACC tournament last week. And I think that they got some question marks there, and I think they need Hartle to go deep. They need him to throw well, and they need him to go deep in this game, because Burns is going to throw a lot of pitches. And if you're going to win this thing, you need to have enough ammo at the back end of this to beat ECU again. And going into this, I was going to pick Wake, and I'm going to switch on the spot, and I think ECU ends up getting this thing done. So I'm going to pivot from what I was thinking 6 minutes ago. I'm going to go with ECU. I think they got more pitching depth than Wake, and that might be what ultimately does it. But we'll see.
I think the big thing for me is when we talked yesterday, Andy, for a while, we were both kind of on the same page. Like, hey, this is the Demon Deeks bracket. The more I kept thinking about it, Savage is, obviously he's got some serious health stuff. That's not just a normal injury; that's serious health concern. So if Savage is back, and he's even 95% of what he normally is, which is, like Keith said, is a top 5 pick. He's probably a top 3 starter in the country in all of Division I. Like, the atmosphere in Greenville in the afternoon on Saturday is going to be wild. And I'm not 100% sold and I think you're dead on with this, Andy, is it's like I'm not 100% sold that Wake's just going to roll VCU on Friday and then automatically just walk into the winner's bracket game with ECU. Evansville might be the best 4 seed in the tournament, by the way. But I just think East Carolina is going to play a certain way. Cliff's going to have those guys ready to play. The atmosphere is going to be out of control. I saw tweets all day about tickets and getting tickets. It's going to be wild. The winner's bracket game, whether it's VCU or Wake, I think it's in East Carolina, and that winner's bracket game at 4:00 on Saturday. I'm just going to lean to the Jungle Pirates, and I'm going to go East Carolina gets out of their own bracket here.
I like it. I like it. Moving on to Lexington. We got the number 2 seed Kentucky Wildcats, Indiana State, Illinois, and Western Michigan. Indiana State got screwed. I think the fact that they were, 17th in the RPI, they were a top 10 RPI team going into their conference tournament, and they draw the number 2 national seed, most likely because the NCAA was too cheap to send them anywhere else. I think they get the short end of the stick here, and I think they probably are meeting one of the more complete dynamic teams in the country. Illinois had a pretty good year in the Big Ten. I think they can beat Indiana State because they got a guy up front that's going to give them a chance. But this is another one. I'm going to pick chalk on this one. I think Kentucky's playing too well. I think they got an opportunity to continue to move forward and make some noise and build on what, if you asked anybody in the SEC if they thought Kentucky was going to be the number 2 national seed or anybody across the country, they would have told you no. This wasn't even a top 25 team coming into the season. And, 60 games in, they're clearly one of the top 5 teams going into the postseason right now. And I don't think that changes. I think they move on.
Yeah, you guys know this. I've been a Wildcat fan for better part of probably 8 or 10 weeks. They lost it. They got swept, or they lost 2 or 3 to Kennesaw State early, and they have been like a rabid animal ever since then. I mean, they have been really, really, really good. I was on the Kentucky bandwagon, like I said, for a long time. Indiana State got screwed just because of saving money from the NCAA, which is total nonsense in my opinion, but it is what it is. The other 2 I don't think even poised to even a chance. It'll be Indiana State and Kentucky on Sunday for a shot to go to a super. I don't think Kentucky's going to have any issues. Their number 1 strength of schedule, RPI I think was 3. Wildcats.
First, let me say I called the ECU head coach Billy Godwin, who is the former ECU head coach. It is actually Cliff Godwin, so I want to at least fact check myself there. Kentucky, I just mentioned earlier, they had the most quad 1 wins in the country. They're 40-14, and they had 22 quad 1 wins. They were, we were texting after that Kennesaw State loss, and I was like, wow, I can't believe that they went into Kentucky and won the series, and they did it in a pretty loud way the first 2 games, and since then they've been just on an absolute tear. I'll say the same thing. I do think that Indiana State did get screwed. I wonder if we remember from last year, they could not host the Super because they host the Special Olympics there. And I wonder if that is something that is going to continue on this year. And maybe that did play into, the thought process in that, or, maybe they said they couldn't because if they do host the Super, they're going on the road again. I don't know. I don't have that insight, but I do remember that being a big thing last year because they ended up, if you remember, they went to TCU after TCU went into Fayetteville and won that Arkansas regional last year. So I agree. Like I think that they should be a host, but I wonder if that was something that kind of played into the thought process. But at the end of the day, I think the Wildcats move on out of this one. I'm going to take chalk out of this one too. I don't think Kentucky, gets beat here. They are going to be moving on and playing in a super against the Corvallis Regional, which is going to be Oregon State, Irvine, Nichols, and Tulane. We have a little bit of a West Coast and Southeast Louisiana matchup here. So, Jonathan, take us away. You're on mute.
I was on mute. I'm sorry. I'm going to go Irvine here. I just don't think the Pac-12 was that good. Simple as that. They had a really nice year. Oregon State had a really nice year. They've been there. They've done it before. I think Irvine is well tested. Their league was tough this year with Santa Barbara. I'm just going to go Irvine here. I just think Irvine. I just have a gut feeling that it ends up being Irvine here getting out of this bracket.
I agree. I'm on the Irvine train. I think they're a super complete team. They play clean, consistent up and down the lineup. They got a couple front end arms, but they're really deep. Kind of like a classic West Coast team. Not going to beat themselves. They've won a ton this year. I just like what they do. I got a chance to watch them a couple times early on in the year. Oregon State's fantastic. Don't get me wrong. Travis Bassana is, if you're going to tune in to watch that kid. He's going to be in the big leagues in 18 months. He's as electric of a position player as there is in the country. I mean, he's right up there, top of the food chain, hitting home runs. He's super explosive. So watch, like, big time player there. Tulane found themselves in the tournament again this year. So, good on them for winning that conference tournament. Nichols stole a spot from a 44-win Lamar team. So I don't think that can be overlooked. For me, I keep circling back to the Anteaters. I think you're going to see a UC team in a super.
I concur. I thought that this was going to be one of my outlier picks. I thought maybe one of you would go with me, but not everyone. No, I mean, they're in a year where I think we've talked about it all year long, really, on the podcast and amongst ourselves, that the West Coast is, down. And in a year where they're down, like, this team has really kind of shown through. I mean, they won the series with Santa Barbara too, who, by the way, is hosting. So I think that, they swept Hawaii at Hawaii, who, at the end of the year, Hawaii put together a pretty good resume too. So I think that if there's going to be an upset here, I think it's going to be Irvine that's going to come out of this bracket, and I'm going to go with them as well.
Well, one other note on this one, we talked about how we think the NCAA, our hypothesis is that we think the NCAA wanted to have 3 West Coast teams. You can make a legit argument that Irvine should have got that host spot over Arizona for a variety of reasons. Higher ranked RPI, you're talking 40-win team. So I think Irvine's one of the better 2 seeds. I think they're dangerous, especially with the style of baseball that they play. I think they're a tough team to handle.
I think that, to your point, Andy, though, this is the precedent was set. So, like,
yeah,
even though, we're saying, hey, like, it should have been 3, the NCAA won 3 West Coasts, they were going to give that to the Pac. If you had a Pac-12 winner and a regular season winner and a tournament winner, you were going to get that over Irvine, because even if they wanted the 3, just because the precedent was there. And I think that's where, although I don't personally agree with making decisions on that way, that was kind of the way they were going to make that decision there.
Agreed. You're right. College Station. Electric baseball atmosphere. They got Louisiana, Texas, and Grambling. I mean, Texas A&M has been as consistently good as anybody in the country from start to finish. They got major thump, offensive firepower. They're playing at home. I think it's tough to bet against them in that atmosphere, but let's be honest, like Louisiana's freaking good. Texas has been a Jekyll and Hyde, but at times they've been electric and have been really, really hard to beat. And there's obviously that rivalry aspect there. I don't think Grambling really factors into this, and I think A&M's ability to throw off here might end up being the difference in them being able to win this. So I'm going to go A&M. I just think it's going to be super hard to beat those guys at home. I do think Texas is a sneaky 3-seed pick here. That if they click for a couple days like they have done a few times during this season, they've proven to be a really good team during stretches. I'm not sure if I believe in them enough to show up in this setting and be an A&M team they're old. I mean, they're running out a bunch of dudes who've played a lot of college baseball, and they got that home field advantage. Like College Station's, it's one of the better home field advantages in college baseball, and I think ultimately that's why I'm going to go chalk again here in the College Station regional.
Yeah, I think you made a good point. I think Texas is probably the best 3-seed in this thing. Nothing against Louisiana. Louisiana's a really good 2-seed though too. But if Texas strings together 3 days of what they have shown half the season, I would say they could easily be getting out of this thing. I'm just kind of with you, Andy. I just think the home field's gonna be way too much of an advantage for A&M. A&M in that building with the ability that they can hit the way they can hit the baseball. I think A&M advances. I'm gonna take the Aggies.
I think it's one of the toughest places to play in college baseball. That ball 4, ball 8, ball 12 chant is one of the most intimidating things I think that you can come across in college baseball, and it's awesome. I think Louisiana Lafayette is good. They've been very strong for a very long time. They scuffled a little bit at the beginning of the year. They figured it out in the middle part of the year, and I think they've lost 3 of their last 4, including in going 2 in the tournament. Which I don't necessarily put a whole hell of a lot of stock in, but at the same time, I do think that might be something that is going to play into what's going on. Texas could make a little bit of noise. Texas, Louisiana Lafayette's going to be a good game. But ultimately, I think that A&M is going to be able to kind of throw off and then, go 1 against 2, because I don't think Texas can really throw off in this situation. And they can have their pitching and everything lined up. And, let's not forget, for a very long time during this year, Texas A&M was the number 1 team in the country. And I think obviously we've talked about this quite a bit, but you got to be really, really, really good in that conference in order to sustain being number 1 in the country for a long time. And they're still really good. Tennessee and Kentucky kind of obviously finished a little bit better, but ultimately I think A&M comes out of this and is hosting a super regional the following week against the winner of the Santa Barbara Regional.
All right, A&M chalk for the squad here. We got Santa Barbara. You see Santa Barbara, San Diego, Oregon, and Fresno State. I think it's the laziest selection for the NCAA possible. But I think this is a tough bracket. For me, I'm gonna reveal my sleeper Omaha pick in this particular bracket. I think this San Diego team is flying under the radar. I think they're 17th in the RPI right now. Really dynamic offensively. They got juice. Everybody can run. They will and can play the small ball game, which I think is very tough to defend because I don't think that it's coached a ton, and I don't think the defensive portion of it is – I don't think a lot of teams are challenged with having to handle that all the time. And they got a bro that they can throw on Friday, and their bullpen is really deep. I think they're a scary team. Hopefully Brock and the squad don't let me down. But I think they come out of this one. Specifically, if they can beat Oregon in game one with their guy. I like San Diego getting out of this one, and yeah, that's my pick. I'm going Toreros.
Jonathan?
I am going to pick Santa Barbara. And I am going to pick Santa Barbara for one specific reason. And I give Santa Barbara and Coach Checketts a ton of credit because there is this stigma out west that the RPI is rigged to the southeast, and it's whatever you want to go with that, fine. They challenged themselves early. They came east. They played Campbell in a 3-game series to open the year on the road. Those West Coast teams do not do that. They don't ever leave, the confines of their own house. And then to top that, they had a field issue, which not a lot of people know about, but they had a field issue. So they couldn't play at home for the first 6 weeks of the season or 5 weeks of the season. They were 25-0 at home. 25-0 at home. It's legit. And guess what? The regionals are in their building. So Santa Barbara.
Touche, Jonathan. Touche. Keith, what do we got?
Jonathan actually stole my stat, but I was going to go with Santa Barbara. I think hosting and being 25-0, I think San Diego's good. Oregon, I don't even know if they should really be in. And Fresno, they're what they are. They were a 4 seed who won the World Series back in 2008, so maybe they can capture lightning in a bottle. I just don't think they're good enough. But Santa Barbara's kind of been that team that, has quietly snuck up and won a bunch of games this year. You don't win 42 games by accident. And have a top 15 RPI and in a conference and a coast again that hasn't necessarily been amazing. But 25-0, at home is something that is super impressive to be able to do. Everyone who's ever coached or played this game knows how tough it is to win, let alone literally win 25 games at home. So I think being able to play in the friendly confines and sleep in your own bed and have a regional where, one team that you probably know pretty well. I think it's going to be the Santa Barbara Toreros moving on here.
All right. Moving on to Chapel Hill. North Carolina, LSU, Wofford, Long Island. I'm going to leave the Wofford shout out to Jonathan because I know he's good friends with JJ. LIU, what a path to the tournament for them. Ended up winning twice in the conference tournament final to get in. So shout out to LIU and them being able to advance. Unfortunately, they draw the definitive best team in the ACC right now, which is North Carolina. I don't think North Carolina has any issues with those guys. But my eyes keep going to this is the first regional that we're coming across where an ACC team is the host and an SEC team is the 2 seed. And we're going to find out how big the gap is between the ACC and the SEC. I should say the other way around, SEC and the ACC. We're going to find out how good those guys really are in comparison. And I think LSU's playing as well as anybody in the country right now. I think North Carolina's phenomenal. Vance Honeycutt is a thoroughbred. Watching that kid play center field it's poetry. The catch he made in the ACC tournament was just absolutely beautiful. Casey Cook is on fire. But I think LSU, who looked halfway through the season like they were not going to be a non-factor. They got 2 legit front-end guys. They've sorted out their bullpen. I think the bullpen might be deeper than it was last year. when they won the national championship, and they still got some big time thump in that lineup. So as good as I think North Carolina is, I think LSU is gonna be my pick here. So I'm going with the Tigers.
I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go chalk here. I'm gonna take North Carolina for the same reason I went with Santa Barbara. North Carolina's 32-2 at home, and LSU is 6-11 on the road. I think LSU obviously is a really good team, being that they're defending national champions. They had what many would probably consider a down year, and they still won 40 games. They were not necessarily the cream of the crop in the SEC, as we all know, but they still won 40 games. They had a really good year. I just think that you play it out over the year, like you're 6-11 on the road. And you're going into a place where, North Carolina might not be the most electric atmosphere in college baseball, but they do get up for the Diamond Heels. And that place is going to be rocking when they're playing this weekend. So, I think 32-2 is nothing to necessarily scoff at. Like to be 30 games better at home is, with the fourth best RPI in the country, is something that, is nothing to necessarily scoff at. So I'm going to go chalk here. We're going to have a plenty of other opportunities to go ACC, SEC here, but I do think North Carolina ultimately moves on here.
Yeah. First off, shout out to Coach Edwards. JJ's a good friend, really good friend of mine for a really, really, really long time, and to see him get over the hump in year one, and obviously what T.I. had done down there, and the two of them really have built that program into just a consistent winner. I mean, they lost, I think, 3 consecutive Sunday or consecutive years on Championship Sunday when they only needed to win once. T.I. obviously goes up to Boston. Perfect job at Boston College for him. JJ gets over. They end up. The funny thing is they were in the play-in game, and they were like 5 games over 500 in the conference. So it was just a wild year in the SoCon, but I just couldn't have been more happy, for those guys, for him. He's been there for like 14 years, like just built that place into a powerhouse. Like I was saying to Andy yesterday, like I remember in 2015, they won 40 games. I think they had like 5 scholarships, like 4 scholarships, like something just crazy. Did a great job. Finally got over the hump this year, with him as the head man. Just fired up for those guys. Just couldn't be happier for all those guys at Wofford, because they're just really good dudes. So
they've done a great. They hit 340 this year. They've done a phenomenal job. JJ's an upstate New York kid, so I love to see how him find success, and he is I don't know him nearly as well as you do, but I know JJ pretty well. Like I'm super happy for him to be able to do that, and again, him and T.I. have really, they've been together. They were together for a very long time, and you always like to see the guy who was the assistant and helping out, who stays and gets the job and the opportunity. Like sometimes people say you don't want to follow the guy who's kind of built it, and JJ has done a phenomenal job there. So shout out JJ Edwards.
Yeah, shout out to the Terriers there. Like I said, I'm just super, super, super happy for them. I couldn't have been more happy on Sunday to see them, get over that hump. And I'm gonna go, and this has nothing to do with the host site, North Carolina. So, and I've told you guys this for the last like 8 days, I would say 9 days, maybe even a few more, maybe like the last 10 days. I've just been on that LSU as a 2 senior regional is a disaster for a host. So nothing against North Carolina. Like I think North Carolina is really good. Like I think North Carolina kind of got screwed, to be honest with you, with having LSU as the 2 seed. I just think LSU right now is playing so good. They have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder for whatever reason. I mean, won a national championship last year, but for whatever reason, they have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. Maybe it was because of how bad they played early on. Jay Johnson's a really good head coach. He's done it everywhere he's been. I just think they're a disaster as a 2 seed for a host. Then I think the Tigers advance. And I think we're looking kind of foreshadow a little bit here. I think we're going to look at like 6 or 7 SEC teams moving on to Super Regional weekend.
Big statement. Big statement. Moving on to Tucson with the controversial host of Arizona, 2 seed Dallas Baptist, 3 seed West Virginia, and the 4 seed by default because the conference championship winner got penalized because they were a Division II team last year. But Grand Canyon's actually really good. Probably very much a deserving team to be in this field. But that's who we got in Tucson. Keith, what's the breakdown here?
I think this is probably one of the tougher regionals, to be completely honest with you. We talked about it. I talked about it at the top of the show. I thought Arizona being a host was a little bit of a reach, but again, I get it. You're a Pac-12 regular season and conference tournament champion team. And that staff, taking over after, Jay Johnson left and what they were last year, what they are this year is obviously a huge turnaround. So I think that they've done a great job. But again, we've talked about how, the Pac, I think, is down, not taking anything away from what they've done. Dallas Baptist had a legit argument to be a host. I think they're one of the better 2 seeds in this conference and, or in this region, excuse me, and in the tournament. Grand Canyon, they got in on a technicality, but they are very good. West Virginia, former head first worker there, and Jimmy Rossinger is an assistant there, another John Grasset, close friend. But, ultimately, I think Dallas Baptist moves on out of this regional. They're a really, really good baseball team. There was an argument. They're 17th in RPI this year, and they're 9-2 with quad 1 wins, and they got 44 wins on the year. You don't luck into 44 wins no matter where you are in this game. So, ultimately, I think Dallas Baptist is the team that moves on out of this regional. I think this is a wide open regional when it comes to, how it's set up this year. But, I think Dallas Baptist is the one that ends up getting to a super against the winner of the Chapel Hill regional.
I think this is the one regional, like if you look at it, like honestly, all 4 teams could win it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is pretty crazy.
Yes.
Grand Canyon won on a technicality, yes. But Grand Canyon won the regular season, which I saw this stat today, by 5 games in the WAC. That's a lot of games when you're only playing 30 or whatever, however many games. Like, that's a lot of wins to be ahead of the second place team. So they got a bro on Fridays. Dallas Baptist may have the 4th best starter in the country on Fridays. With Ryan Johnson. And West Virginia's offense is absolutely legit. Mm-hmm. So, I think one of the coolest maybe stories of this tournament will be Friday with Ryan Johnson going against West Virginia's offense. Because, again, a little biased. Love the Mountaineers because my boy Jimmy's there. Love Coach Rossinger. He's a good friend of mine. But you have some bros on the mound and you're looking at this and you're going, oh, well, and Arizona, with the precedent is a regular season Pac-12 team or champion and a tournament champion. Like their profile is really good, but you look at it and you're like, so are the other 3 teams in this bracket. And that can't be said for every other bracket. There are certain brackets. We talked about something like, the 3 and 4 will be irrelevant. They'll be gone by Saturday afternoon. They'll be gone their way home. This bracket, I don't know who's going to be going home on Saturday afternoon. Like it's going to be pretty wild to me. So I'm going to go West Virginia here. Randy Mazey, Coach Mazey last year, magic carpet ride a little bit. They got the best offensive player probably in the country, maybe besides the Condon kid from Georgia and JJ Weatherholt. Mm-hmm. He was projected number 1 pick before the season. He got hurt. He's probably still a top 10 pick, left-handed hitter. Like, I don't know. West Virginia, since Coach Mazey's been there, has just been around the block. It just seems like a lot. and I think that may pan out here. I'm gonna go Mountaineers to move on.
First 3 seed to be picked as an advancing group. I'm gonna, and this pains me. And if you're listening to this, Coach Vance, know that I love you. But I think Dallas Baptist is a really good ball club. I think Ryan Johnson is an alien. I mean, let's look at his numbers real quick because they're just wild to even utter. He's 11-2 with a 1.98. He's thrown 100 innings, which is just wild in itself. He's punched 147 dudes. He's walked 12. 12 freaking guys. He's walked the whole year. Like, just what a mess to have to handle him.
Is that 14 to 1 strikeout to walk, basically?
Yeah. Guys are hitting 211 off of him.
In a year where everyone's saying the ball is juiced and strike zones are super tight because of track, man.
And so here are some key statistics for Dallas Baptist, and I think you can see where I'm going with this. They had 302 as a team. They got a dude with 21 pumps, 13 pumps, 15 pumps, 10 pumps, 16 pumps. They got 4 guys with double-digit stolen bases. They field 982. They're pitching at a 398 clip, and it's not just because of Ryan Johnson. Their next best starter, Jaron DeBerry, is a 3.75 guy, 84 innings. Like, this is a really good team. And
I'm gonna go one more, Andy, because I coached at Dallas Baptist. I'm not sure if you guys ever coached there. Wake Forest is a very, very, very friendly ballpark. Dallas Baptist might be more friendly to hitters than Wake Forest is. So to have that ERA in that building is the offensive numbers are great, fine, no big deal. But to pitch at that number and that ballpark, to me, is absolutely wild.
3.98. I think they're one of 7 teams in the whole freaking country who have a team ERA under 4.
They got this big American flag. It's huge, right in center field. It's awesome. It's great. When I was a pitch coach at Brown, we played there and we practiced earlier in the day. The park played fine. We got there at 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock, whatever it was, 7 o'clock start. This American flag, straight out. I mean, this thing's huge, this American flag. It is the whole thing, man. It is dead out. And I remember thinking to myself as we pulled up, oh my goodness, what have we gotten ourselves into here? I mean, this thing couldn't have been, I mean, it was about to break off of the flagpole. That's how fast this thing was pushing straight out. So very impressive, Dallas Baptist.
It's like pitching at Columbia when the wind's going southeast and you got to face a bunch of left-handed hitters.
Listen, I was a pitch coach at Brown. Anyone that is listening to this podcast that ever pitched at Brown or coached against the Bears or Columbia, like, you know, hitter-friendly parks are like, that's just second nature. This was another animal, man. It was hot, you know, because it's warm in Dallas, obviously. The temperature's warm. This thing is like, I mean, the metal, you can hear the metal on the flagpoles back, like, and I'm going, I don't know if we have enough guys. I mean, they were really good. I mean, and listen, they've been good for, you know, the better part of 2 decades, right? So, like, they had a guy who was a first-round pick. He was a third baseman. Can't think of his name right now, but he was on that team. He was with the Red Sox. He was in AAA last year with the Red Sox. But they've had really good teams for the better part of 2 decades. And I'm going to myself, what have we gotten ourselves into coming down here? Like, this wind is wild. So to pitch at a 3.98 and to be one of 7 teams in the country under a 4, especially this year, like Keith said, with, you know, everyone saying the strike zones are small and everything, it's impressive, man. Really impressive.
Well, mark me down for Dallas Baptist.
Got it.
All right, we're halfway through. Fayetteville, Arkansas, Louisiana Tech, Kansas State, Southeast Missouri State, excuse me. This one's an easy for me. Somewhere's got to happen for Arkansas not to win this one. I don't think K-State should even be in the tournament. Arkansas is super hard to play at. They got Hagen Smith. Good luck with that. Arkansas is a little bit dinged up. They're not playing quite as well as they were in the middle of the year when they looked very much like kind of the runaway number one. But they're getting healthy, and if they can get through this regional, which I think they do, they should get Tiger back, and they get really scary heading into the Super and into the College World Series. But for me, quick one, Arkansas. Shout out Matt Hobbs.
The ability for them to be able to throw off is my big thing. Is they can throw off, and now you have Hagen Smith on Saturday, so like somebody's going to beat them twice on Sunday or Sunday/Monday. Like Hogs, and again, I don't think they're quite the team they were in the middle of April. I mean, you and talked about that, Andy, yesterday. Like, they're kind of the one of the 5 SEC teams that maybe at risk to be, have a hiccup, just because I don't know if they're as good on the mound as they were about a month ago. But again, like, you throw off, then you got Hagen Smith. You're not beating, LA Tech. Nothing against LA Tech or Kansas State. Kansas State, I agree, shouldn't have been even in the field. But LA Tech's got a great year. But like, you're not beating Hagen Smith, and now again, you're going to beat them twice on Sunday in their own building, or Sunday/Monday. Like, yeah, Razorbacks.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going against anything but chalk here. I mean, Louisiana Tech, yeah, I mean, I said this earlier, like, you don't lock into 44 wins, but I mean, Arkansas is just a different animal. And I don't necessarily think, no one's going in there as hot as TCU was last year. And I think they have that taste in their mouth of not allowing that to happen again. So throw off, you get Hagen Smith. And I mean, that kid's been unbelievable this year. So I'm taking Hogs to get to the Super Regional to host the winner of the Charlottesville Super.
What do we got there, Coach Glass?
Well, that one is going to be the Mighty Cavaliers of UVA. This is another ACC-SEC matchup. You got Mississippi State coming into town. You got the Johnnies of St. John's, who has had a phenomenal year. We had the pitching coach, Coach Brown, on earlier this year, and they pitched it really well this year. They were 16th in the country. They had a 4.26 ERA this year, so they won the Big East tournament. They beat Georgetown in the final on an unbelievable catch in left field, and then you have the 4 seed the Penn Quakers out of the Ivy League, who won the Ivy League tournament this year and for the second year in a row. And last year they found themselves in a regional final down at Auburn. I don't necessarily think that's going to be the case for the Quakers this year. They've had an okay year, but I don't necessarily think they're going to make a lot of noise in this regional. I do think it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to end up being, Virginia and Mississippi State in the finals on Sunday or Monday. I do think St. John's can throw a wrinkle into this, just because I do think St. John's is, has some arms that could keep you quiet from an offensive standpoint. But, I just think the depth of Mississippi State and Virginia ultimately are what is going to get those two teams into the final. I never thought that I was really going to say this, but I ultimately think that Mississippi State moves on out of this regional. I think UVA is a good team, but I don't necessarily think they're the UVA teams of the past. They have some good wins on there, but I think Mississippi State has had a good year from an SEC standpoint, and I think ultimately Mississippi State is going to be the team that moves on out of this regional.
Coach Grasset, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, shout out to Penn Quakers, great year. Wyatt Hensler's an absolute dude, Ivy League Player of the Year. Obviously, those Ivy guys, always pulling for those guys. Doing more with less for sure. St. John's had a phenomenal year too after a couple down years, kind of on St. John's-ish, I would say. And UVA's had a really good year. They're really good. I think the one thing that goes back it's kind of like for me, and I know I just kind of said this because I've been saying it with LSU, like it didn't matter what bracket that they were going to get put in. I just feel like Mississippi State feels really slighted in terms of not hosting. And if they can just take that energy and just use it to their advantage, I don't think they're going to have any issue in Charlottesville, and I think they'll walk out of there the winner here. So I'm going to take the Bulldogs. The only way that I see another scenario happen is that it almost goes to a disadvantage that they're not hosting, and they kind of use that energy and they just don't show up because they're still mad about what the selection show or the selection committee did. But I'm going to go with the Bulldogs here. I said this to Andy yesterday. I felt like, any team that was going to have them in their bracket was like, it was like a hornet's nest because they were going to be furious. 17 regular season wins, another few more in the turn. Like, it's a lot of aggregate wins in the SEC. 18 is usually the number to host, in years past, in terms of aggregate SEC wins. So they got there, didn't get that host spot. They feel slighted. Bulldogs, I feel like, advance here, and they'll be the 7th SEC team for me to move on.
Yeah, I got the Bulldogs too. Shout out Coach Brown. Awesome job at St. John's this year. That whole staff just started off the season with a win at a top 5 at that time, a top 5 Florida team, and they just kept rolling. Won a lot of big games and I wouldn't even say they got hot in the tournament. They just played the way they've been playing all year. Really good to see them back. I know they really dealt with some injuries the last couple of years, and really cool to see that. Obviously, Penn continues to excel. I think they're sneaky for Virginia, and Virginia better watch out because Penn does have some front end arms that can make it real tough on you. But I think what this regional comes down to me is that I don't think Virginia pitches enough. Outside of Evan Blanco, you don't have a starter that you feel good about. I mean, they're all over the place with starters. The numbers aren't good. It's not as good of a pitching staff as UVA's had in the past. I don't know if that offense is electric as it is, and I cannot underestimate how good this. And they're hitting 341 with 113 bolts. Like, this is a dynamic offense. But Mississippi State's pitching at a 4 clip in the SEC with a bunch of depth. I think that's ultimately the difference. I think Mississippi State's got some more pitching. I think they got some more guys that they can trust. I think they got athletes up and down that lineup. And I think they got a chip on their shoulder. So I'm going Bulldogs here. I think it's the second regional that we've talked about where I think the SEC starts to prove their separation from the ACC. So I'm going Bulldogs.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to illustrate your point, like, I mean, Mississippi State's pitching at a 4. I mean, they're top 25 or 30 in the country in team ERA. Like, in un-UVA, like, they're 104th in the country pitching at a 5.6. I mean, I'll take the good pitching over good hitting any day of the week. All right, next one. What do we got? Where are we going?
Clemson Regional. Clemson, okay. Vanderbilt, Coastal, and High Point. Shout out High Point. First ever appearance. Pretty cool accomplishment for that program. Got to note that. Clemson, Vanderbilt, Coastal, I think are probably the 3 teams that potentially factor in, although we talked about how Coastal probably shouldn't even be in the tournament. I think there's a 2-dog race, but Keith, what's your pick? What do you got?
Yeah, I think that we have another ACC SEC matchup here. Coastal, I don't. We're not going to beat a dead horse here, but I don't necessarily think that they should be there. And High Point, into the tournament for the first time ever. And Joey Hammond there, the head coach, he was awesome dude. He was actually a volunteer at Wake for a couple of years and working Wake camp, got to know him. Awesome guy. So to see him, get that job at High Point and they've been really good for the last couple of years and finally kind of break through and get into the NCAA regional is a phenomenal thing for them. Ultimately, I think this comes down to the ACC, SEC with Clemson and Vandy. I know Vandy has scuffled this year a little bit and Clemson's been good, which is interesting because you're going to have Bakich and Corbs going at it. And, I said this, we didn't record and do a conference tournament preview. But I did say to these guys that I thought Vandy was poised to go on a pretty deep run into the SEC tournament, which they did. Ultimately, I'm going to go with the Clemson Tigers here. I do think that, it's going to come down to them and Vandy. But I just think that Clemson's been a little bit more of a complete team, start to finish this year. There's something to be said about the fact that Vandy's getting hot at the right time. And they're playing really good baseball right now. But this is at Clemson, and, Clemson is, known as being a pretty tough place to play in college baseball. I mean, they're 27-6 at home this year. So, they're 40 wins. Vandy hasn't been great on the road this year. It's something that we've talked about, a little bit, but they're not necessarily haven't been great on the road. But I ultimately think the Clemson Tigers are going to be moving on from this regional at home and hosting a super the following week.
So in the most unshocking thing ever, Vandy gets hot at Hoover. I'll be honest, 9 days ago, you would ask me, I would have said Vandy was left for dead. Like they were 13-17 in the SEC. They had played terrible. I can't remember the exact. Them in South Carolina South Carolina was 1-8 in their last 9. Not to get off topic, but South Carolina was 1-8 in their last 9. Vandy, I think, was like 2-7 or something like that. Or I think it was 2-7 in the SEC. Everybody had them off. Barely in. They're going to need help in Hoover to get in. What does Corbs and company do? They go on a run. Least shocking thing in the entire world, right? Same song and dance we've seen for, again, a better part of a decade and a half with Corbs and company and running the show. To Keith's point, one thing that a lot of people don't know is that not only will you have Bakich and Corbs, obviously as the head coaches in presumably what will be the winner's bracket game on Saturday, who work together at Clemson, but you will also have their former boss in the dugout as Coach Leggett's the special assistant to the head coach at Clemson again now. So you're going to have 3 of the 4 outside of Sully in Florida, obviously, that were on that staff that most would argue was maybe most would probably argue, right, that the greatest college baseball staff ever. You're going to have 3 of the 4 of those members on the field in the dugout together.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty cool.
Which is awesome.
Pretty cool storyline for Saturday if we can get there. If Vandy can take care of business, I think Clemson will be fine to take care of business. But if Vandy can take care of business and we can have that on Saturday, I think that would be a really, really, really cool storyline to have. Have 3 of those 4 guys, one being the boss. Bakich was the volunteer at the time, which, again, at a place like Clemson it's not like he's working for free, but still it was a non-paid position. And it's just really, really, I think that's really, really, really cool. But I'm going to lean with Keith here, and I'm going to do that. Coach Bakich does something that Monty couldn't have done, Coach Lee couldn't do during his tenure at Clemson, and Bakich is going to get over the hump. They're going to beat Vanderbilt in a regional setting, and they're going to get to a super. So I'm going to go Clemson here. Coach Bakich and company.
I don't have too much more to add to that. Great tidbit on Coach Leggett being back in the dugout. My gut wants to say Vanderbilt here, but my head says Clemson. It's tough to argue about what they've done this year. They've been remarkable in terms of close games, which I think is a skill. Being able to come back, being able to compete. So yeah, I gotta go chalk here. I gotta go Clemson. We'll see who they're gonna face in the Stillwater Regional, which is Oklahoma State, Nebraska, the Gators, and Niagara, the Purple Eagles. Shout out Rob McCoy. Great season up there with 38 wins, Keith. Is that right?
Great question. I will let you know in 2
38.
seconds.
38, and I think 14, I believe, was the number.
Which is just a
38 and 18, maybe something like it's 38 though. Which is wild.
38 and 15.
15,
yeah.
okay.
Like, they probably don't really factor into this regional, but to win 38 games in the Northeast, never mind in Niagara, New York, like shout out Rob McCoy. This is a good team. I think they're going to surprise some people. And I think you're going to see some talent. They can hit. I know they got a couple power arms. Be interested to see how they match up with Oklahoma State. I don't think they're really a threat to those guys, but 38 wins is, man, that's freaking good. I don't think that can go unnoticed. Here's the problem I have with this regional. I don't think Florida should have been in this tournament. I don't think they should have been in consideration. But they can win this regional, and it wouldn't surprise me if they do.
Mm-hmm.
At all. Nebraska's got a bro they're going to throw. He's a Big Ten pitcher of the year. They're going to throw him on. But make no mistake, like Florida's got some of the more talented players in the country in that lineup. It hasn't always clicked. But if they win that game, you can't bet against them in game 2 with Caglione throwing.
They're not throwing Cags on Friday. Sully said it on his radio show this morning.
Yeah. So this
they're going to throw there. Yeah.
This is as
sorry.
Yeah, this is as hypocritical as you can get because I don't think they have any business being in this tournament, but I think they win this regional. And it shouldn't be happening, but I think they're going to win this regional. So, yeah, there I said it, Florida. And I like this Oklahoma State team. I watched them a couple times in the Big 12 tournament. One, cleanest uniforms in college baseball, absolute fire.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that squad. They play super hard. But if you got to face Caglione in game 2, I can't bet against that guy. He's as good as they get in college baseball. So I think that's why Florida can win this regional.
So I'm going to take Oklahoma State, and on principle, I'm not taking Florida because I just can't bring myself to do that. So, because I totally agree. I don't think they have any business being in it. I don't think they should have been the first 4 out. I think they should have been in the next 4 out. But they won on Saturday against Georgia, which ended up being the difference in their season because everyone kind of knew that game would put them then, if they lost on Tuesday in the SEC tournament, which they did, a win there was the difference between 27 and 28 wins and vice versa with the losses. So they got in. It is what it is. Scott Strickland, the AD on the committee, no big deal. We'll talk about it another day. I think Oklahoma State, the reason I like Oklahoma State is a lot of what you said, Andy, is like, I don't think that Oklahoma State cares that Cags is as good as he is. Like, I don't think that they're going to be intimidated. I think the way Coach Holliday has this group, and I think this could be said differently for a lot of other teams, but I think the way Coach Holliday coaches this group and has his team assembled is they don't care who Cags is. Like, yeah, he's going to be a top 8 pick or whatever he ends up being, top 10 pick, but they don't care. Like, they play hard. They've always played hard for him. They've been in Omaha. He's been in Omaha. They got a veteran staff of all guys that have been in Omaha. They're in their own building. They got clean uniforms, like you said, which I don't know what that means, but great. Like, awesome. I'm going to go Pokes here because Nebraska, it is what it is. Like, they got in, they're fine. But I don't think they're an issue, to be honest with you, just because of the Big Ten, like we talked about. So I'm going to go with the clean unis, and I'm going to go Oklahoma State to move on.
Huh. I'm actually going to take Nebraska.
Oh, first regional, three different picks.
All three of us are completely different here in Stillwater. I understand where both of you are coming from. I think this is a pretty wide open regional. I don't necessarily like. I agree that I think the Big Ten was likely down, but they lose 2 games to weather, which is why it's on percentage points in the Big Ten. Like I don't know who they lost those games to, obviously to weather. They could be outright Big Ten champs. They had almost 40 wins. They won a bunch of games on the road. They won a bunch of games neutral. They're not that far behind RPI standpoint from Oklahoma State. And I think that they have a better record overall against quad 1, 2, 3, and maybe not 3 and 4. Oklahoma State beat up on some quad 3s and 4s, and we're just okay against 1s and 2s. I'm not picking Florida from with Jonathan. From a moral standpoint, I just can't do it. I don't think they should be there. I agree. They very well could win this regional, and they could. I think this is a pretty wide open one. I think Nebraska. They've been flirting with the top 25 all year long. I think they're a pretty good baseball team. I know that the Big Ten, we've talked about before, is a little down, but I think they're probably the best team there. They have better pitching and offensive numbers than Oklahoma State, for whatever that's worth. But I think getting in, if they can get into those games, they likely could be having to get beat twice on championship day, and that very well may happen. But I'm going to roll with the Cornhuskers here, and hopefully we can pull one out here.
Dig it. Yeah, the number one uniform selection in college baseball for me is Oklahoma State. I want to make that very clear. I think those things are freaking sharp.
Real sharp on Sunday celebrating them. You know what I
mean? The next, we got 4 more left. We got Athens, Georgia, another surprise SEC team that has been they've been good all year. They got the 2 seed UNCW, Georgia Tech, who I don't think should be in the tournament, and then they got the Army Black Knights, head coach Chris Chaz, podcast guest, 6 straight. Is that right? 6 straight.
I think it is 6
for Coach Chaz in the Black Knights. Really good program up there in the Patriot League. They just continue to win. Not surprised Chris has got back-to-back since he's taken a head coach job up there. Keith, what do you got here in Athens? What's going down?
I think I don't think Georgia Tech should be in this tournament. Wilmington, obviously, CAA, they won the tournament. They had a really good year. The Black Knights with Trazer, I think I think Army can make a little bit of noise in this regional, if I'm being completely honest. Ultimately, I'm going to take the Georgia Bulldogs. Their offense has been exceptional all year long. We talked about it earlier in the year on our one podcast, and I don't even know if I brought it up, but they were starting to surge, and I was like, I think this Georgia team might be for real. And they were. They did. From what they were, last year and subsequent years before that, to where they are now is night and day. I think Army could likely find themselves in the championship game here. I'm not saying they're going to win it, and I'm not picking Trazer because he's my guy and I caught him in college, but they can flat out pitch. And I think when you get into these tournament games and you have a bunch of guys who can really pitch, they're close to top 10 in the country in ERA. They got like a 4.1. And I think when you can really pitch in these games and you can find, they have a really good, they have some guys in that middle lineup that can lose some baseballs and can really do some damage. You find yourself in some of these games where, you are 1, 2, 3 run games. I've watched a bunch of Army games this year. They've played a bunch of those games, and they generally come out on top. And I mean, let's face it, they're going into the Army. Like they're not necessarily scared of anybody. Again, ultimately I'm going to pick the Bulldogs, but I think my surprise regional run this year is going to be the Army Black Knights. I think they can make some noise and end up in a regional final against the Bulldogs, but I think the Bulldogs move on.
I'm going to take Georgia here too. I think Georgia, and shout out to Army because Army had another phenomenal year, 6 straight, 2 straight for Traz. Awesome for those guys. Georgia Tech doesn't belong in this tournament. They're another one that shouldn't even be in the next 4. They should be in the next 4 out, but whatever. It's besides the fact. Georgia in their own building is different, and I'd have to pull it up. I don't know. Their home numbers are gaudy though. In terms of home wins, the one thing I think the biggest thing for them is just, which they hadn't been able to do with Coach Strickland is can you get over the hump as a national seed? They have not been able to do that. And the 2 times with Coach Strickland, he was there as top 8 seeds. Could they get over the hump? And they had not been able to do that. So I think that's the big thing for them. But I just think in their building, that offense, it's going to be obviously super warm down in Athens. The wind will probably be blowing out. I have a hard time believing that they have any issues. They'll throw off. Wilmington and Georgia Tech obviously can't. Wilmington and Georgia Tech don't have like phenomenal number 2s. So now you're going to run into Georgia's 1. We'll take the Bulldogs here.
They're 29-5 at home.
Yeah.
And that place is, when they're good and that place is rolling, it's a tough place to play a coach there.
The fans are really on top of you. It's not huge, not big.
They're literally sitting on top of the dugout.
But it like waves, like feels like it's waving over the field.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. Coach there as well.
I really like this Wilmington team, and there's a part of me that wants to pick them here. I mean, Tanner Thatch, like the amount of home runs that are in this regional between 2 players, like Tanner Thatch has 27 bolts. And then obviously you got Charlie Condon, which what did he end up with?
1,000.
35.
35. Like there's some
like
big
60, not even 60 games. He had 35 bolts. Like what?
Against the best conference in the country.
In the best pitching conference or in the best conference in the world. Like, and it's not even close.
Yeah. I'm a CAA guy. Randy Hood's awesome. I've seen this Wilmington team in action. They're usually super athletic. I'm sure it's no different. But I don't see them getting over the hump here with Georgia. I don't think Georgia Tech's a factor. I could see Army beating Georgia Tech in game 2.
I would love that, to be honest. I would absolutely love that.
Yeah, I could see that happening where Army's able to win a game here and then get to another game with UNCW. But UNCW can't pitch off to beat Georgia Tech, to your point, Jonathan, and home field advantage. So I'm a Bulldogs guy here as well.
Winner of this regional gets the winner of the NC State Rally Regional, which is going to have NC State, South Carolina, JMU, and the Bryant Bulldogs. Who you got, Andy? You can double up on picks here.
Double up on picks here. Shout out Ryan Klosterman. First time Bryant's been back to the big dance since 2016. We met the Bryant Bulldogs in a matchup at UVA while I was at William and Mary. Also, shout out.
That was a really good Bryant team, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, the kid who's pitching in the big leagues.
They won like 42 games, right, or something?
Yeah, they lost to ECU in game 1. Who's the kid he's super high energy dude. He's pitching out of the Indians bullpen there.
Yeah, I can't think of his name. Yeah. He was on that team. They were loaded.
He threw. ECU ended up beating him. And then we got the best of them in game 2. But that was a really good team.
Yeah, they were
Steve
physical.
Owens. Shout out to Coach Eikenberry at James Madison, who's just a absolutely exceptional human being. I think he won his 500th game the other day.
Yep, he did.
Great year for JMU, making that move into the Sun Belt. Really cool to see them get that at-large bid. I think it is deserved. Then you got South Carolina, NC State. I'm so back and forth on this NC State team, but some of the wins that they put together this year, I'm not a big believer in what South Carolina is doing. I don't feel great about that team. I think they got some talent, but I'm going to go chalk here. Like I like the James Madison team. I think they can beat South Carolina. I could see them getting hot, but I like this NC State team. They've been playing well. They've gone into some rowdy environments on the road and went to win, which I think bodes well for them considering they're playing in their home stadium here. But yeah, I'm gonna go Wolfpack.
Yeah, I think this might be my toughest one to pick, to be honest with you. Like I said, like 8 or 9 days ago, I would have been like, there's no chance I'm picking South Carolina, but Cole Messina is a stud and set the record for RBIs, and he didn't even take him to get to Saturday to set the RBI record for the FCC tournament, which is pretty legit. I think he ended up with 17. He broke it on, I believe it was Friday. I think he broke it with 15, which is just an insane number. He had 4 bombs or 5 bombs. Like, I don't know. Like, they're kind of like NC State to me though, like where you're like, yeah, like who are you? Like, you know, are you a potential host, which a lot of people thought obviously 3 weeks out, and then they went 1-8 in a span that they barely got the one win was barely on Sunday to not get swept at Missouri, who was terrible. And it's like, well, who are you, South Carolina? Like, are you potential host like you were a month ago, or and really, I mean, like if you look at the way they played in Hoover, like they looked like a potential host, type of. They weren't ever going to be a host, but they looked like a team that could be a potential host. And same with NC State. NC State, it was swept Georgia Tech on the road, then got swept at home, like just all over the place, kind of. I'm going to go Wolfpack here. I probably have too many number ones picks, so I probably shouldn't, but I'm going to go North Carolina State here just because I think it's more just like default, like they should be the best team in the bracket. So North Carolina State.
I didn't really know. I'm the same as you guys here. Like, I didn't really know what to do here. I mean, Bryant's been, they had a phenomenal year in the America East. Back and forth game in the championship against the fighting UMBC Retrievers. JMU has had a really good year. I mean, this is their second year in the Sun Belt, and I think they finished 4th, or right around there, maybe tied for 3rd. They had a great year transitioning out of the CAA and into the Sun Belt, or the Fun Belt, as we like to call it. Which is one of the top to bottom best conferences in the country. And I'm with, like, it should come down to NC State, South Carolina, but I feel like they've been Jekyll and Hyde all year. I'm not confident in this pick. I'm going to go with South Carolina just to be different than you two. But I'm not confident in this, and I'm not confident if I took NC State. So I just think this is, like, they're like, from a top team, top 2 teams in a regional standpoint. They're supposed to be 2 of the better teams in the country. It's been so Jekyll and Hyde, But I'm going to side with South Carolina here over NC State. But I don't have a lot of confidence in that. So take that for what it's worth.
Yeah, this to me is one of the weirdest regionals because I don't really see a team. There's nobody in this regional that I feel can get to the College World Series. And it might be the only regional where I feel that way.
That's fair.
Like, looking at it, it's like every other regional, there's a team in there where you're like, yeah, that team can get to the College World Series. Mm-hmm. I don't know if there's anybody in here who can. that was where my trouble with it is like, I think it's an interesting regional. And then I do think that
like you said, Andy, but it's almost like the team that we're picking or the team that does end up getting out is going to be 0-2 and be gone by Saturday afternoon in 2 weeks.
Yes.
Because like unless South Carolina swings it the way they did, I don't even know. I think the team that wins it will be 0-2 and will be on their way home Saturday afternoon in a super.
I mean, we're talking about a 33 win team that's hosting and a 36 win team that's the 2 seed.
1 and 8 in their last 9 in the SEC.
Right.
Including a barely a win again, like straight to win against Missouri to not get swept on Sunday. Who was terrible.
I mean, JMU is 34. I mean, there's a lot of wins in this regional. I just don't like. I'm not confident. And Brian is 36. Brian has the most wins in this regional as a 4 seed. Now, albeit it's against, it's not against SEC and ACC and Sun Belt competition, but I think that's where it's, you look at this and you're like, I'm not confident in picking either of them, but I think you both are right. Like, I don't think either of them are. Whoever wins this regional, I don't think beats Georgia to go to the World Series.
Tallahassee. Apparently, Florida State got that fence fixed.
Cali.
You got Alabama, UCF, and Stetson. I think this might be the deepest regional in my opinion. Like, Stetson's a 41 win team, and they're a freaking 4 seed right now. I need a minute to continue to try to.
We said it yesterday, Andy, when me and you were talking. Like the reason that this could be one of the deepest brackets, is because you don't really have a true mid major in there, right? Like Stetson's a mid major, but 41 wins and a Sun team. Like, is that a true mid major? Like, I don't know about that, right? Like, I mean, I don't know about, I don't know. Like, and then you're talking about an at-large in UCF, and then you're talking about an Alabama team. I had my thought, you guys already know my opinion on a 13-18 aggregate SEC record. So I'm not going to pick Alabama. I'm not going to pick Central Florida. I'm going to take Florida State because I think Link did arguably one of the best jobs in the country this year on a team that did not get into the ACC tournament a year ago and is a national seed. Big time. They opened the season. I think they were 25-0 to start the year. They lost 2 games at Clemson. One in heartbreaker fashion. They were up like 8-1. They had a lead in the second game, lost again, come back and win on Sunday. Like, I don't know. Like, it just feels like they might be tougher than everybody else in this bracket. And, they got the best player in the ACC, obviously, the Dolly kid. Like, I think he had 18 or 20 bolts. Like, I'm going to go Florida State. I just think they're just tough. I think Link's done a freaking great job there. So I'm going to go Florida State here.
Well, there's an interesting storyline here with UCF and Florida State. Like, Rich Wallace was at Florida State with Link and took over UCF, and it's a heck of a job that he's done there. I think Florida State's got to tread lightly here with Stetson. Like, they cannot underestimate that, and they've got some depth in that starting rotation. And like, obviously, they got the Arnold kid who's a bro, but Stetson's dangerous, and if they don't show up in game 1 against those guys, it could get sketchy for them. I like that team. I can't pick Alabama. I don't feel great about UCF. I don't think Stetson can win it. I think they can cause some trouble. So by default here, I go with Florida State. I think they're the best team in the regional, and I think it lines up well for them. But I do think they need to be on alert here for Stetson because that's a good club that can give them some.
I think they will be, though. You know what I mean? I think that, and we talked about it earlier, like you said, like, some of these one seeds will be able to throw off, and use. Obviously, that's not going to be the case here. They're going to need to throw their number one to beat Stetson. But I just think, like, Stetson, like, going to like a Georgia or going to like a Southeast place as a 4 seed, those teams I feel like would take them maybe a little bit more lightly, where like it's in the state of Florida. They play each other. I don't know what they did against each other this year. Like, Stetson beat Florida, I believe, this year at least once, maybe twice. I just feel like the omit or the lookover factor is going to be less because it's in state, as opposed to if you throw them in, if they were thrown up in Lexington as a 4 seed, or even in Clemson, or even in, Georgia, like, oh, well, it's an A-Sun team. We play Austin P. We beat them on a Tuesday. Florida State knows what they're getting on Friday afternoon with Stetson. Like, this ain't no slouch.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
Well, to your point, because I had it in front of me and what I was going to talk about, like, I think this is similar to the Athens Regional. Ultimately, I'm going to pick FSU for a multitude of reasons that you guys have already touched on. Like, what Link's done there over the last year is impressive. To go from not making the ACC tournament, which I think there's only 3 teams left out, which to being a national seed is pretty ridiculous. That said, I think Stetson could, likely be in the championship game, having to beat Florida State twice. They did beat Florida. They split with Florida State this year. They lost 1-0 and they won 10-5. And they split with Florida. They beat them, and then they got boat race in another game. They split with UCF. But to your guys' point, like, I don't, like, they all know what they're getting. But I think that familiarity is also, like, these are one-off. Like, when you're playing these guys, like, yeah, they're midweeks, but now you're throwing your weekend guys against each other. So, like, you're not going to be scared. I don't think you luck into 40 wins. So, I think Trimper's done a great job there in DeLand, Florida, with the Stetson Hatters. They won the series. They split the series at the beginning of the year with West Virginia. They went 2-4 against them. So they've been battle tested against some teams that are in the conference or in the NCAA regionals. Ultimately, like I said, I think Florida State moves on, but I think this is a region where, you're going to end up with Florida State, Stetson in the championship game. I'm not taking Alabama. I'm not taking UCF. I think it's those two. I think Florida State moves on, but Stetson could be this, one of those teams where it's like, oh, hey, here we go. The 4 seed is in the championship. We weren't expecting this. And, I think it's probably one of the least, unlikely things to happen that Stetson finds themselves into a championship game.
The last regional, before I'm going to make us up a couple surprise questions to the squad here. But we got Norman, Oklahoma, Duke, UConn, and Oral Roberts, who is obviously the fan favorite last year with their incredible run. For me, this one's pretty simple. I really like this Oklahoma team, and we talked about this probably 6 or 7 weeks ago, that I thought they were a sleeper Omaha team, but, dude, I'm on the Duke train. That team's playing good, man. They're old. Like, they're old as hell, and they've got some legitimate talent. They're playing really well right now. I think that's where my mind goes. I think Duke wins this regional. I think they get to a super.
I love Oklahoma. I texted you guys probably 2 weeks ago. And I was like, every person that's on Duke's roster has legally been able to drink for over 2 years, which is a big deal this time of the year. Charlie Bielenson's a freaking bro. I recruited him when I was at Brown. Pitched for me. He's an absolute dude. He's a game changer in terms of in the bullpen for them. I love Oklahoma. And this may have been the toughest bracket for me to pick because I really, 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 really like this Oklahoma team, and I think they're very, very, very solid, and I think that they could end up in Omaha. But I think the Blue Devils are gonna move on, and I think they're going to have a shot to get to Omaha. And I think it's going to be really, really, really cool to see that happen because they got a ton of Ivy fifth-year guys. They got a ton of transfer guys. They got the Newton kid who's a Division III guy. They're just loaded in terms of older guys, and I think this time of the year that will pay huge dividends for them. I'm going to go with the Blue Devils as well here.
I'll close us out with taking the Sooners. Ultimately, I think this is a coin flip between these two teams. I mean, they're 15-16 in RPI. They're separated by 2 wins. I think that Duke has the edge in the experience from an age and experience standpoint. I just don't necessarily know going on the road to Oklahoma if you have to win 2, if they can do it. And I'll be honest with you, John, the best man at my wedding is probably not going to be thrilled with my pick here, but I think that the Sooners are the most likely winner coming out of this. I hate picking chalk, but I love this Oklahoma team. I think that they're really good, and I do think that they might escape by the skin of their teeth, but I think Oklahoma ultimately moves on out of this regional.
All right. I have to close out with this question. If there's a 4 seed who's going to win a regional, who's your pick? Coach Grasset, kick it off.
Evansville.
Coach Glass.
There was no hesitation.
I think they're the best 4 seed in the thing.
In that whatsoever. 4 seed to most likely winner of the 4 seed. I mean, I'd love to go with my man Chris Traz. I would probably say Grand Canyon, just because they're an Arizona team. Like they're offensive. I mean, and for those of you that don't know, I've never played or coached out west. Like the air's thin, and you could jump the yard pretty quickly and have some fun. I would go with them.
Arizona can't throw off, like to Andy's point with that one. So like that's always throws around you.
That's my pick too. Grand Canyon is the one. And it's funny because they got in by default, but to your point earlier, Jonathan, like they were the best team in that conference. It wasn't particularly close. I think they're the 4 seed. I think they could win the Tucson Regional. But I was going to throw another one in there. I think Stetson could win the Florida State Regional if a couple things went their way.
I think Stetson is – my top 3 would be – I know this wasn't the question, but my top 3 would be Grand Canyon, Stetson, and Evansville. But I would – Stetson just because they're not going to be scared of going in there. But I do think – and the reason I would not pick them is because your midweek guys and your weekend guys generally are going to be a lot different. Or I shouldn't say a lot. They're different enough to where it can make a difference in those regional settings.
All right, last question. It's May 28th. Who's your number one sleeper Omaha pick? All right, here's the criteria. It can't be an FCC team. And it can't be, they have to be a 2 seed or lower. That's a criteria.
I have 2. I'm going to give you 2. I'm going to say, and both are underdog picks that I made. I'm going to say Irvine, and I'm going to say West Virginia.
Okay. Coach Glass, what do we got?
Goodness gracious. I picked all chalk, so I can't, there's probably Dallas Baptist would be my sleeper.
Yeah, I got San Diego and I got Dallas Baptist. Those would be my 2. Mine and train.
I did pick the mighty Nebraska Cornhuskers, but I don't know that they're.
You though is if you get them in a super and you got to deal with that alien on Friday, and then you just got to figure out a way to win one of the next two, even on the road.
Yeah.
So, and again, like in my opinion, you're talking about Ryan Johnson's in the same category, maybe a touch below, but like I think you're looking at Hagen Smith, Chase Burns, and Savage are in kind of a category of their own. The first two might be in a little bit of a more of a category, but like 1B and 1C are Savage and Ryan Johnson. Like you could very easily make the case that Dallas Prep's got to figure out a way to win one of the next two and could easily do that.
But I think
who knows?
Here's the other interesting storyline that I think would be amazing if Wake Forest actually won the Greenville Regionals. You have Chase Burns going back to Knoxville.
Yeah. That's
to an environment that will not be friendly to him.
Wow. No, but that would be an
environment that will not be welcoming him with open arms. Like
that would be that. Like that's an amazing storyline. Yeah. If Wake Forest pulls this out and they go back to Tennessee, like that would be amazing. Because like in a super regional setting, like he's starting on Friday night.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he would have to.
Have to.
You got to win game one.
That place will
on
be
the road,
electric.
Like, you got to throw your bro.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting storyline. It might be the most interesting one going into the Supers if Wake can figure out a way to win that Super and go to Tennessee. Don't tell me the committee didn't have that conversation.
100%.
Oh, without a doubt.
All this is all.
All right. Well,
you don't.
I think my opinion on the committee and what they've done thus far is documented here. So we're just going to end it at that.
You don't think LSU being a 2 seed and potentially having to go, playing Arizona in a super, Jay Johnson's former team, wasn't part of the conversation?
Another good one, Keith. If you tweeted that, you'd be a conspiracy theorist.
Get your tinfoil hats on, people.
Get your tinfoil hats on.
Elon might flag that as we have to check the records on that. Is the committee conspiracy theorists like us?
Too many good things here.
He might know Mr. Haig from Coastal Carolina, so he might not. So it might be good.
Well, gentlemen, it was wonderful. Can't wait to do it next week. See what we got right. See what we got wrong. Talk a little bit more shit. And yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Appreciate your time, man.
See you guys next week.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Go whoever's playing the Gators, baby.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for listening.